The lecture hall seemed to shrink as Commander Korl entered, his presence drawing the attention of every cadet like gravity itself. His battle-worn armor bore the scars of countless campaigns, each mark a story untold. Behind him, the crystalline walls of the Xyrethian Academy shimmered faintly, refracting the starlight from the twin suns. Silence settled over the room as Korl turned to face his audience, his one remaining organic eye scanning their eager, untested faces. The holographic display behind him flickered to life, revealing a rotating image of an unremarkable planet. Blue seas swirled against continents of green and brown, framed by the infinite black of space. "This," Korl began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the depths of time itself, "is Earth, the cradle of humanity. A species the galaxy once dismissed as insignificant." A faint ripple of laughter passed through the cadets. They were young, eager, and still unshaped by the galaxy's harsh truths. "They look fragile," one cadet whispered, not realizing the commander's cybernetic hearing could detect even the faintest sounds. Korl's cybernetic arm twitched almost imperceptibly as he turned toward the source of the comment. His metallic eye glinted, reflecting the image of Earth on the display. "Fragile," he repeated, his voice laced with something unidentifiable, perhaps bitterness, perhaps respect. "A word I once used myself. But let me tell you what I learned at the siege of Elysium." The cadets straightened, the murmurs dying instantly. The siege of Elysium was a name spoken with reverence and unease among warriors, its details shrouded in legend. The hologram shifted to show a battle-scarred world, its skies blackened with smoke, its cities reduced to skeletal ruins. Elysium was a colony on the edge of human-controlled space. Korl began, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of memory. Strategically insignificant, poorly defended, or so we thought. My fleet descended upon it with confidence, certain that we would crush its meager resistance in days. The hologram zoomed in, revealing towering Tarvik's dreadnoughts, their sleek designs bristling with weapons that gleamed under the pale light of Elysium's star. Opposing them were human vessels, a mismatched fleet of freighters, repurposed mining ships, and ancient warships that seemed to hold together more by will than design. Korl paused, letting the image sink in. We had every advantage. Numbers, firepower, technology. Yet by the time the battle ended, I stood on the surface of Elysium, a defeated commander. The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief rippling through the cadets like a wave. "Defeated," one of them blurted, his voice incredulous. "Yes," Korl said, his gaze locking onto the cadet. "Defeated, not because we lacked strength, but because we underestimated something far more powerful than strength: human ingenuity." A hologram shifted again, displaying scenes from the battle. Human ships darted through the chaos, their movements erratic and unpredictable. They exploited every weakness, every blind spot. When a Tarvik's destroyer's shields faltered for an instant, human pilots pounced like predators sensing blood. "They fought like nothing we had encountered before," Korl continued. "Every ship we destroyed seemed to birth a dozen new strategies. They used the debris from their own losses as weapons. They turned asteroids into shields. They even raided their own vessels to explode, taking entire squads of my best pilots with them." A cadet raised her hand cautiously. "Commander, were their tactics desperate?" Korl's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable. "Desperate," he repeated. "Perhaps, but desperation is a tool in human hands. They wield it like a blade, cutting through the impossible. What we saw as chaos, they saw as opportunity." The hologram transitioned to the surface of Elysium, showing Tarvik's soldiers advancing through ruins. At first, the humans seemed to retreat, scattering like ants before a storm. But then the ground itself turned against the invaders. Traps sprang from every corner, walls collapsing to block escape routes, makeshift explosives hidden in abandoned vehicles, sniper fire from unseen perches. "We thought them weak," Korl said, his voice now carrying a sharp edge. "But weakness is a facade. Humans use it to lull their enemies into complacency. By the time we realized their true strength, it was too late. The display finally showed the aftermath. Human survivors emerged from the rubble, battered but unbroken. They tended to their wounded, salvaged what they could, and began rebuilding even as the Tarvik's fleet withdrew. They didn't win the battle through brute force, Korl concluded. They won it because they refused to accept defeat. Every move we made, they countered. Every weapon we unleashed, they found a way to neutralize. And when the dust settled, they still stood. The cadets sat in stunned silence, their bioluminescent scales dimming as the weight of the story pressed down on them. Korl stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over them. You are here to learn the truth about humanity. Not because they are stronger or smarter than us, but because they are something far more dangerous. They adapt, they endure, and they never, ever stop fighting. The hologram faded, leaving the room bathed in the dim glow of the twin suns. Korl's voice dropped to a near whisper, though it carried to every corner of the hall. Remember this, we fear them not because of what they are, but because of what they can become. And if you ever find yourself facing humans in battle, understand this, they will find a way to win, even if it means turning the stars themselves against you. With that, Korl turned and walked out, leaving the cadets in silence. For the first time in their young lives, they understood what it meant to fear. The cadets returned to the lecture hall the next day, their scales muted with unease. Commander Korl stood at the front, arms crossed, his mechanical eye glowing faintly. No one dared speak as the room fell into a heavy silence. Korl activated the holographic interface again, and the display shifted to a new scene. It showed an immense orbital structure encircling a blazing star. The structure was a marvel of Tarvik's engineering. Helios Gate, a fortress built to defend the inner systems of the Alliance. This, Korl began, was where we believed humanity would finally be stopped. Helios Gate was impregnable, its defenses unparalleled. We had learned from our mistakes, or so we thought. The cadets leaned forward as the hologram zoomed in on the fortress. Massive plasma cannons lined its surface, each capable of vaporizing a fleet with a single shot. Layers of shields shimmered like a second skin, and drone swarms patrolled tirelessly. Korl's voice dropped, resonating with both pride and pain. We believed no force in the galaxy could breach Helios Gate. Then humanity arrived. The hologram displayed the arrival of the human fleet, smaller than expected, a collection of ships that seemed mismatched and unassuming. The cadets exchanged confused glances. Commander, one finally asked, breaking the silence, why would they attack with so few ships? Surely they knew they were outmatched. Korl's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the cadet. That is the human way, he said. They don't attack with strength. They attack with purpose. The human ships halted just beyond the fortress's firing range, a formation that seemed almost hesitant. But then the hologram highlighted something unusual. Small, metallic objects released from the ships, drifting toward Helios Gate with no apparent purpose. Korl pointed to the objects. These were their weapons. Not missiles. Not drones. Mining probes. The cadets erupted in murmurs, their disbelief audible. Mining probes? Another cadet asked. Surely they couldn't. They could, Korl interrupted. And they did. The humans had modified those probes to emit a concentrated electromagnetic pulse. They detonated them at precise intervals, creating a cascade that overwhelmed our shield harmonics. Within minutes, the outer defenses were compromised. The hologram shifted to the interior of Helios Gate, where Tarvik's engineers scrambled to restore systems. The humans didn't press their attack immediately, instead allowing chaos to spread within the fortress. They exploited our overconfidence, Korl continued. While we tried to repair the shields, they launched their next move. A series of targeted strikes against the power grid, leaving the fortress vulnerable. The cadets watched in silence as human ships darted through the crumbling defenses, their maneuvers unpredictable and erratic. Every countermeasure the Tarviks deployed was met with an unforeseen tactic. One of their ships broke through to the core, Korl said, his voice heavy with memory. It was a cargo vessel, unarmed, unarmored. We didn't even consider it a threat until it was too late. The hologram showed the cargo ship colliding with the central reactor of Helios Gate. But instead of exploding, it released a cloud of nanobots that infiltrated the reactor systems. Within moments, the power core began to destabilize. What happened next? A cadet asked hesitantly, their bioluminescent scales flickering with anxiety. Korl paused, his gaze distant. They didn't destroy Helios Gate outright. That's not their way. They left us a choice. The nanobots created a controlled overload in the reactor. We could either shut down the entire fortress to prevent an explosion or let it burn. The cadets sat in stunned silence as Korl continued. We chose to shut it down. In doing so, we surrendered the system. Humanity didn't just defeat us. They forced us to make the decision ourselves. And that, cadets, is what makes them so dangerous. They don't rely on brute force. They make you fight yourself. The hologram faded, leaving the room bathed in dim light. Korl stepped closer to his audience, his voice softer now but no less commanding. Helios Gate was not just a battle. It was a lesson. Humans are not constrained by rules or traditions. They see every situation as a puzzle to be solved. And when they solve it, they don't just win. They change the game entirely. The cadets sat motionless, their pride now tempered by a growing respect for the enemy they once dismissed. Korl's gaze swept over them, his expression unreadable. Remember this. To fight humans is to face the unknown. You may have the advantage in strength, numbers, or technology, but they will always find a way to turn those advantages against you. And when they do, it won't just be your ships or soldiers they destroy. It will be your certainty. With that, Korl deactivated the interface and left the room. The cadets remained seated, their minds racing with the implications of his words. For the first time, they truly began to understand the enemy they were up against. The third day of the lecture series arrived, and the air in the Xyrethian Academy felt heavier than usual. The cadets filed into the hall with quiet reverence, their once bright scales dimmed to muted shades. Commander Korl was already waiting, his silhouette imposing against the crystalline backdrop. He began without preamble, activating the holographic display to reveal a sprawling orbital shipyard, its scaffolding encasing the beginnings of a massive Tarviks dreadnought. Surrounding it were defensive platforms and a fleet of warships, gleaming with advanced weaponry. This, Korl said, his voice as cold as the void, was Nova Crucible, the crown jewel of our military industry. It was here that we built the ships to reclaim our pride, to ensure that no species, least of all humans, would ever defeat us again. The hologram shifted to show workers and drones laboring tirelessly, assembling a fleet designed for absolute dominance. Nova Crucible was a fortress in itself, Korl continued, surrounded by automated defenses, shielded by layers of kinetic barriers, and protected by an entire fleet. We believed it to be impenetrable. The cadets leaned in, their anxiety palpable. They already knew how the story would end. Humanity knew it too, Korl said grimly. And they came anyway. The hologram displayed the arrival of a human fleet, a ragged formation of ships that seemed to pale in comparison to the pristine Tarviks' defenses. But the humans didn't attack. Instead, they stopped just outside the range of Nova Crucible's sensors, holding position like hunters watching their prey. At first, we didn't understand their strategy, Korl said. They made no aggressive moves, no attempts to penetrate our defenses. Days passed, then weeks. The tension grew unbearable. But that was their plan all along. The cadets exchanged uneasy glances, psychological warfare. One of them asked. Korl nodded. Humans understand that war is not just about weapons. It's about breaking the mind as much as the body. While we waited for an attack that never came, They were already dismantling us from within. The hologram zoomed in on Nova Crucible's outer defenses. A single human vessel had approached under the guise of a supply freighter. It docked at one of the automated platforms, its crew seemingly harmless. "They used our own systems against us," Korl said, his voice tinged with bitterness. The freighter carried infiltration teams equipped with technology that disrupted our automated defenses. Within hours, the platforms turned on each other, their targeting systems compromised. The cadets watched as chaos unfolded. Turrets fired indiscriminately, shields flickered and failed, and confusion rippled through the Tarvik's fleet. "But that was only the beginning," Korl continued. "While we scrambled to regain control, the humans deployed their second phase, a weapon we had never anticipated. The hologram shifted to show a fleet of human ships releasing small, spherical objects that glowed faintly. "What are those?" a cadet asked. "Biological disruptors," Korl replied. "They carried engineered organisms that thrived on the alloys used in our hulls and infrastructure. The humans had studied us, learned our weaknesses, and turned them into weapons. The disruptors spread like a plague, consuming critical systems and leaving ships immobilized." The cadets watched in stunned silence as the massive fleet of Tarvik's warships, once symbols of invincibility, became inert hulks drifting helplessly in space. "What happened next?" another cadet whispered, their voice barely audible. Korl's expression darkened. "The humans didn't destroy Nova Crucible. They took it. Once our defenses were neutralized, they boarded the shipyard and secured it with precision strikes. They spared the workers, allowed them to evacuate, and left us a message." The hologram displayed an image of the shipyard's central command hub, its walls marked with a single phrase scrawled in human script. "This is your final warning." The cadet's scales flickered with unease. "They let it go." Korl's voice grew softer, but no less menacing. "They didn't need to destroy it. They showed us what they could do. That was enough. They knew fear was a weapon more powerful than any fleet." The hologram faded, leaving the cadets to sit in silence as Korl stepped forward, his scarred face illuminated by the faint glow of the display. "Nova Crucible was not just a loss," he said. "It was a humiliation. Humans didn't defeat us with brute force. They dismantled us piece by piece, showing us that our strength, our technology, and our pride meant nothing to them. They taught us that in war, the mind is the greatest battlefield." He paused, scanning the room. "You are here to learn about humanity not because they are stronger or faster or more advanced. You are here because they are relentless. They adapt, they innovate, and they never, ever stop fighting." With that, Korl deactivated the interface and left the cadets alone with their thoughts. For the first time, they felt the weight of what it meant to face humanity, not as an enemy, but as a force of nature. The days at the Zyrethian Academy blurred together, the cadets now keenly aware of the lessons unfolding before them. Their pride, once as bright and unyielding as their bioluminescent scales, was beginning to dim under the weight of Commander Korl's stories. The horrors of humanity's adaptability had seeped into their consciousness like a slow, unavoidable poison. It was day 4, and the lecture hall was darker than usual. Korl stood in the center, his mechanical eye flashing a muted red, a sign of something: regret, weariness. The cadets couldn't tell. They had learned to watch for the signs, the subtle shifts that indicated a deeper tale, a more haunting story. Without a word, Korl activated the holographic interface. The display flickered and then stabilized to reveal an enormous space station suspended above a desolate planet, a world known as Seraphim. The station itself was a marvel of Tarvik's engineering, a labyrinth of corridors, reactors, and military-grade defense systems that could repel entire fleets. Its purpose was simple: a forward base to monitor the human frontier. It was meant to be impenetrable. "Seraphim Station was the pride of our security networks," Korl began, his voice more somber than usual. "A bastion in human space, surrounded by layers of defense. It was thought to be the ultimate deterrent against human aggression. But as we learned, humans do not operate on deterrence. The hologram zoomed in, showing the station's heavy turrets and energy shields, its maze-like structure protected by automated defense drones. The place exuded a sense of cold, mechanical perfection. For months, we kept our watch over the human frontier from here, expecting trouble. Yet the humans did not attack. They did not even attempt to breach our defenses, Korl continued. We watched as they moved closer to Seraphim's vicinity, their ships wandering in seemingly aimless patterns. It was disconcerting. We expected their typical unpredictability. Instead, they waited. The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard of this. Humans waiting, studying, preparing for the perfect moment to strike. But it was more than just their unpredictability. Humans were patient, and sometimes that patience could be far more dangerous than any weapon. The hologram shifted to show a human vessel entering the outer reaches of Seraphim Station's sensor range. It was nothing remarkable. A freighter, its hull scratched and worn from years of use. But instead of confronting the station directly, the freighter deployed an array of small drones into the surrounding space, sending them scattering in every direction like a swarm of locusts. "What are they doing?" one of the cadets murmured, their voice barely a whisper. "They are probing," Korl answered, "testing for weaknesses." But that was only the beginning. As the hologram zoomed in, the small drones, once appearing harmless, began transmitting signals. Dozens, then hundreds, each one designed to mimic the frequency of Seraphim's own communications. They jammed the station's systems, slowly and methodically disrupting its internal infrastructure. And then, without warning, the freighter launched something far more terrifying. A single, unassuming payload that slid silently toward the station. The payload contained a virus, Korl said, his voice tightening. A biological computer virus designed to infect and shut down our internal systems. The humans had researched Seraphim, studied its architecture, and created a virus that could bypass every security protocol we had in place. The hologram flickered as the virus spread throughout the station's mainframe, disabling shields, weaponry, and even life support. Within hours, Seraphim's once impenetrable fortress had become a lifeless husk. The humans didn't attack with weapons. They didn't need to. They attacked with knowledge. Korl continued, his tone growing darker. They knew our systems better than we did, and they used that knowledge to cripple us without ever firing a single shot. The display changed, showing human soldiers boarding the now crippled station. Instead of wreaking havoc, they moved with surgical precision, neutralizing any remaining defense systems with ease. The station, once a symbol of the Tarvix's superiority, had been rendered obsolete by the human mind. Afterward, we learned something even more terrifying. Korl said, his voice steady but filled with a cold, bitter understanding. The humans didn't just disable Seraphim. They had taken the data we had stored there, intelligence, military secrets, tactical protocols. They learned everything about our operations, our vulnerabilities, and our plans, and they did it without firing a single weapon. The cadets remained silent, their faces a mixture of disbelief and awe. How could a species so seemingly primitive outsmart them so thoroughly? Korl's gaze swept across the room, his mechanical eye locking onto each cadet in turn. Humans understand one simple truth. Knowledge is the ultimate weapon. They don't rely on brute force or superior technology. They rely on their ability to outthink you, to see angles and possibilities you'll never even consider. And when they get inside your mind, it's already too late. The hologram faded to black, and the room was plunged into darkness. For a moment, the cadets could hear only the sound of their own breathing, thick with uncertainty. Korl stood at the front of the room, his silhouette outlined by the faintest glow from his eye. "You are here to learn," he said quietly, "because humans will never stop learning. They will never stop innovating. And no matter how perfect you think your defenses are, they will find a way in. It is not their strength that makes them dangerous. It is their relentless pursuit of knowledge, their ability to adapt and evolve at a speed we can't comprehend. The true weapon of humanity is their mind, and it is a weapon we are all vulnerable to. With that, Korl turned and left the room. The cadets sat motionless, the weight of the lesson pressing down on them like the gravity of a dying star. The halls of the Zyrathian Academy felt colder as the 5th day of lessons began. The cadets had learned much, perhaps too much, and their once unwavering confidence in their superiority was now overshadowed by the knowledge that they had underestimated humanity. They no longer greeted Commander Korl with the same boldness, their scales dimmed by a quiet, growing sense of dread. Korl was waiting for them, his imposing figure illuminated by the soft, ambient glow of the Academy's star-shaped windows. There was no small talk today. His posture, even more rigid than usual, suggested that the lesson ahead would be more difficult than the ones before. Without a word, he activated the holographic display, revealing a map of the galaxy. The cadets watched as the projection zoomed in on a star system that sat at the edge of Tarvik's controlled space, a place called Vortex 7. This, Korl began, his voice heavier than it had been in previous lessons, was the site of the greatest deception ever executed against our fleets. Vortex 7, a system we had written off as insignificant. The cadets looked at each other, puzzled. Vortex 7 was a small system, known for its barren planets and harsh conditions. It didn't seem like the kind of place that would warrant Korl's attention, or anyone else's. Vortex 7 was a key staging point for our latest military campaign. Korl continued. We were preparing to strike at human colonies that had grown too bold, too defiant. They had become a thorn in our side, and we were confident we would crush them in a matter of days. But once again, we underestimated humanity. The hologram shifted, showing Tarvik's warships moving into position around the Vortex 7 system. Their sleek, angular forms bristled with weaponry, and the image conveyed an air of overwhelming superiority. Yet there was something strange about the human presence, or rather, the lack of it. We were prepared for resistance. We knew the humans would fight back. We just didn't know how. Their fleet was absent. The hologram zoomed in on the Vortex 7 system, showing the space around the star empty, eerily so. The Tarvik's fleet entered the system without incident, their sensors scanning the void for any signs of human activity. But there was nothing. Not a single human vessel in sight. We searched for hours, then days. The human fleet was gone, vanished. At first, we thought they were hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But we didn't know that the perfect moment was us. The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension in Korl's voice. We didn't know it then, but what we were witnessing wasn't a retreat. It was a trap. Korl's words hung in the air. The humans had drawn us in. They let us approach their territories without interference. They made us believe we had the upper hand, and we walked straight into the heart of their deception. The hologram shifted again, this time showing the Tarvik's fleet beginning to establish a blockade around the outer planets of Vortex 7. Slowly, the fleet spread out in what appeared to be a routine maneuver. There was still no sign of human vessels, no attacks, nothing to suggest anything amiss. But then, something changed. Without warning, a massive gravitational anomaly erupted in the center of the system. The cadets gasped as the hologram showed the phenomenon. An intense gravitational pull that began to bend space itself. Ships began to drift uncontrollably, their trajectories altered by the powerful gravitational waves. We thought it was a malfunction, a random cosmic event. But no, it was a human weapon, an artificial black hole placed in the heart of the system. They had engineered it with such precision that it remained invisible to our scanners until it was too late. The cadets watched in horror as Tarvik's warships were pulled toward the event horizon, their engines powerless against the unnatural gravity. The ships strained, engines burning, but they couldn't escape. And that was when the next phase of the trap began. We tried to retaliate, of course, but the humans had anticipated our every move. Once we were trapped, they attacked. The hologram revealed human vessels finally emerging from behind the cover of the planets. Their designs were sleek, unassuming, nothing like the overwhelming power of the Tarvik's fleet. Yet in their hands, these ships were more than capable of taking advantage of the situation. They didn't rush in with overwhelming numbers. No, they played their cards carefully. They used our own momentum against us. As we struggled to escape the black hole's pull, they released drones, hundreds of them, each one capable of exploiting the gravitational anomalies to strike our weak points. They didn't fight us like a conventional enemy. They didn't need to. They attacked our very nature. The hologram displayed the battle. Tarvik's warships, caught in the clutches of the black hole's gravity, were destroyed by precision drones that wormed their way through the ship's hulls, exploiting every weak point. Within hours, the Tarvik's fleet was crippled. What happened next? A cadet asked, their voice trembling. Korl's voice was cold, detached, as he recounted the final blow. We didn't have time to recover. As we retreated, trying to flee the black hole's influence, they deployed their final weapon, a wave of quantum disruptors that scrambled our navigation systems. We couldn't escape, and the humans, with their small, fragile ships, chased us down one by one. The hologram showed the remnants of the Tarvik's fleet, scattered and broken, with human ships closing in, securing victory with an efficiency that still haunted Korl. They didn't just beat us. They shattered our arrogance. They made us believe we were the hunters when, in reality, we were the prey. Korl's voice grew sharper. The human mind, unpredictable, brilliant, was the weapon we could never truly understand. And it was that very mind that turned Vortex 7 from a military operation into a catastrophe. Korl paused, letting the silence stretch out. The cadets were still, their scales dim, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and growing respect. The humans knew our arrogance. They knew that we would underestimate them, just as we always had. They used it against us. And now we are left to consider, what else have they learned about us? What else have they hidden, just out of reach, waiting for us to fall into their traps again? Korl's eyes scanned the room, his voice carrying a finality that left no room for doubt. Remember this, cadets. Humanity does not fight like we do. They do not fight for power or dominance. They fight for survival. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy we could ever face. With that, Korl deactivated the hologram and left the room, leaving the cadets to ponder the lessons of Vortex 7, lessons they would never forget. The 6th day of Commander Korl's lessons dawned with a palpable unease hanging in the air. The cadets, now familiar with the terrifying adaptability of humanity, entered the lecture hall more subdued than before. Their once boisterous chatter had been replaced with hushed whispers, as if even their voices were afraid to disturb the lessons they were absorbing. There was something different in the way Korl stood that morning. His stance was heavier, almost haunted. Without waiting for a word of greeting, Korl activated the holographic interface. A new system flickered to life on the display. Tetra Prime, a once thriving colony on the fringes of human space. The planet was a jewel of human ingenuity, an oasis built on the barren landscape of a hostile world. Large cities sprawled across its surface, gleaming under the twin suns. The human presence there had been relatively peaceful, an outpost of prosperity, unremarkable in its outward appearance. Tetra Prime, Korl began, his voice low and unsettling. A symbol of human survival, a world we thought we could simply take. The cadets looked at each other, confused. There was nothing about Tetra Prime that seemed like a target. No vital resources, no strategic location. It wasn't a world worth conquering, at least not in the traditional sense. But then, as Korl's gaze swept across the room, they understood that this story wasn't about conquest. It was about something much darker. Korl's voice grew even quieter as the hologram shifted to show a Tarvik's fleet approaching the planet. The human colonies on the outer rim had begun to grow bolder. Tetra Prime was one such colony. We were ordered to destroy it, to remind humanity that we held dominion over their worlds. The hologram zoomed in on the fleet's approach, displaying massive Tarvix warships positioned in a tactical formation around the planet. But something was wrong. The fleet was not met with resistance. No human ships moved to intercept. No weapons fired. It was as if the planet itself had vanished from their calculations. We expected a defense. We expected the usual human tactics: mining drones, guerrilla warfare, ambushes. We got nothing. Korl's voice was tight with frustration. There was no fleet to fight, no resistance to crush. It was eerily quiet. A cadet raised their hand, breaking the silence. Then what happened, Commander? How did the humans respond? Korl's eye flickered briefly, and the cadet's question hung in the air for a long moment before he answered. They didn't respond, cadet. Not in the way you think. They simply waited. The hologram shifted, showing the fleet entering the upper atmosphere of Tethra Prime. The skies above the cities remained perfectly clear, without the smoke or fire that would have marked a human struggle. But beneath the calm exterior, something else was happening. Do you know what the humans did? Korl asked, his voice barely a whisper now. They knew we would come. They knew we would underestimate them. And so, they prepared. Not with weapons, not with soldiers. They prepared with something far more insidious. The hologram zoomed in on Tethra Prime's surface, showing large structures, underground complexes that had once appeared unimportant. The camera descended into the planet's crust, revealing a sprawling network of tunnels and hidden vaults. The structures were silent at first, but as the fleet closed in, their true purpose became clear. We thought Tethra Prime was simply a colony, Korl continued, his voice strained. But it wasn't. It was a trap. Not for our fleet, but for us. The invaders. The humans had buried their weapons beneath the surface. Not weapons of fire or war, but weapons of silence. The hologram showed something unfathomable. As the Tarvix ships descended toward the planet, massive structures began to activate. It wasn't the launching of missiles or the opening of fire. No, Tethra Prime responded with something far more subtle. A wave of strange, resonating frequencies pulsed outward from the underground vaults, sweeping across the surface like a shockwave of sound. The frequencies they used were not random, Korl explained, his tone filled with a kind of grim admiration. They were designed to disrupt our neural patterns, to interfere with our brain functions. The humans didn't need to fight us with guns or shields. They turned our own minds against us. The cadets watched in horror as Tarvix soldiers aboard the ship staggered, clutching their heads, their movements slow and erratic. The very essence of their coordination, so finely tuned after years of training, began to unravel. Their minds became clouded, disoriented, their once perfect unity dissolving into chaos. The wave didn't kill us, Korl said. It didn't destroy our ships. It paralyzed us. The hologram shifted to show the fleet in utter disarray. Ships collided with one another as crew members became incoherent, unable to follow commands. Weapons malfunctioned. Navigational systems failed. The once unbeatable Tarvix fleet was now a crippled mass of disorganization, drifting helplessly above Tethra Prime. Korl paused, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. The humans didn't need a fleet to win. They didn't need to fight us directly. They simply made us fight ourselves. A cadet stood up slowly, unable to keep the disbelief from their voice. But why didn't they finish us off? Why didn't they strike when we were helpless? Korl's eye locked onto the cadet with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. Because the humans knew that victory wasn't in our destruction. It was in our surrender. They knew they didn't need to kill us. They just needed to show us that our greatest strength, our ability to control our minds, could be taken from us without a single shot fired. The hologram showed the final moments of the Tarvix fleet's retreat. No shots were fired. No battles fought. The fleet, broken and demoralized, withdrew, unable to engage further. The surface of Tethra Prime remained eerily still, untouched. The humans had won, not with violence, but with the simple, terrifying power of control. Korl's voice was low, almost regretful as he addressed the cadets one final time. This is what makes humanity so dangerous. They do not fight with what is expected. They fight with what is unseen, what is hidden. And when you face them, you face not just an army, but an entire species capable of bending your mind, your will, and even your soul. The room was silent, the cadets' bioluminescent scales dimmed in contemplation. The lesson of Tethra Prime was clear. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their strength, their speed, or their weapons. It was their ability to turn the most subtle of forces into an unbeatable advantage. With that, Korl deactivated the hologram. The room remained in darkness for a long moment before the lights flickered back on. But for the cadets, the shadow of what they had just learned remained, lingering in the cold, silent air of the academy. The seventh day had come, and there was a certain heaviness in the air that the cadets could not shake. The stories of humanity's cunning and unpredictability had settled deep into their minds, haunting their every thought. They entered the lecture hall with a silence that spoke volumes, each cadet inwardly grappling with the realization that their once untouchable superiority had been shattered, piece by piece, by a species they had once dismissed as primitive. Commander Korl stood before them, his form outlined by the soft glow of the academy's lights. His posture was rigid, but there was something else in his eyes, an exhaustion, a weariness, as if the weight of his knowledge had become too much to bear. Without a word, he activated the holographic display. A new system appeared on the screen, Orion Reach. It was a vast, uncharted region of space, a place where the known universe's boundaries met the unknown. It had long been thought to be beyond human reach, a place where no one, no species could survive. But once again, humanity had proven everyone wrong. The Battle of Orion Reach, Korl began, his voice heavy with the memories of a lesson learned too late. A final chapter in the story of our defeat, a place where humanity's survival instinct was put to its most extreme test, and where we realized that no matter what we did, no matter how many fleets we sent, they would always be one step ahead. The hologram shifted to show a map of the Orion Reach system, a dense region of space, filled with gravitational anomalies, asteroid fields, and massive radiation belts. It was a place few would dare to enter, let alone colonize. Yet, as Korl continued, the human presence in the area became undeniable. We underestimated their will to survive. We thought we could wipe out their outposts in the Reach with a simple bombardment. After all, it was a hostile, uninhabitable place. The humans had no right to be there. The cadets leaned forward, their attention fixed on Korl as the hologram zoomed in on human outposts scattered across the system. Some were on asteroids, others built into the craggy surfaces of rogue planets, each one a testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. The humans weren't just surviving in Orion Reach, Korl continued. They were thriving. They were adapting. They built outposts that defied the very nature of the system. And we knew we had to destroy them, to wipe them out before they could become a threat. We sent our fleets, our best ships, to carry out the mission. The hologram displayed the arrival of the Tarvik's fleets, massive dreadnoughts descending on the human colonies. But the human outposts didn't panic. They didn't flee. Instead, they did something far more terrifying. They welcomed the assault. Instead of running, they turned their colonies into fortresses. Their ships didn't flee, they engaged. And in doing so, they gave us a taste of the true nature of human warfare. The display showed human ships, small, unremarkable in comparison to the Tarvik's warships, flying into the heart of the enemy formation. They didn't rely on speed or overwhelming force. Instead, they used the very hazards of the Orion Reach system as weapons. Their ships adapted, dodging asteroid belts, using gravitational anomalies to create traps, and even exploiting radiation belts to interfere with the Tarvik's fleet's navigation. We had never seen anything like it. Instead of engaging in the way we expected, head-on, in the traditional form of battle, the humans turned the system itself into the battlefield. They forced us to fight in a place where we had no control, where every misstep, every mistake, meant death. The hologram shifted to show a single human vessel, its hull battered but still intact, darting through the dangerous asteroid fields, maneuvering with precision and ease, a dance of survival. The Tarvik's fleets, by contrast, were slow, predictable, and unable to adjust quickly enough to the treacherous environment. They didn't fight us like soldiers. They fought us like survivors. And in that moment, we realized the truth. We could not defeat them on their terms. The cadets remained silent, taking in the image of the human vessel that somehow outwitted the overwhelming power of the Tarvik's forces. For the first time, they understood the scale of humanity's resilience. It wasn't in the strength of their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was in their ability to adapt, to outthink, and to survive against all odds. Korl paused, letting the weight of the lesson sink in. We had one final chance. With their fleet scattered and their colonies in disarray, we thought the humans would be easy pickings. But once again, they turned the tables. They adapted. They withdrew, not in defeat, but in calculated retreat. They didn't surrender. They simply gave up the fight. For now. The hologram shifted one last time to show the final image of the battle, the Tarvik's fleet, battered and broken, retreating from the system. The human outposts, though scared, remained intact. And as the Tarvik ships fled, the humans began to rebuild. They retreated, but they didn't lose. And that is the nature of humanity. They don't need to win every battle. They only need to survive. And that is a power no enemy can overcome. Korl's voice softened, his gaze lingering on the cadets. Humanity doesn't fear defeat. They understand it, embrace it, and grow stronger from it. That is what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not their strength, not their weapons, but their will to survive. And that is something we cannot take from them. The room was silent as the cadets absorbed the final lesson. For the first time in their lives, they understood what it meant to face an enemy who would never give up, never surrender, and never stop fighting. Humanity was not a threat because they were stronger or smarter. They were a threat because they decided to be. Korl turned and walked toward the door, his final words echoing in the room. The galaxy may fear us for our power, but it is humanity that we must truly fear. And until you understand that, you will never understand the true nature of war. The cadets remained seated, their minds still reeling from the lessons they had learned. For them, the galaxy had just become a far more dangerous place, and they had learned, too late, that the most powerful weapon was not one of force, but of will.